Good evening, folks. You're listening to Race Matters. This is Edward Carson here, and I'm here with a very special guest.
Kat Everett of Posing.
Oh, we got Katrina in our house, and you're listening to WJOPLP Newburyport Joppa Radio 96.3. You know what? We're here to talk about a few things, but particularly we want to talk about finding joy amidst tragedy. And the reality, of course, is we've seen quite a bit of tragedy of late. Of course, we've all been kind of grieving and talking about the situation in Uvalde, Texas, and all those young, precious children being, well, leaving us a little too soon. We'll say that much. And we're going to talk about the problems of white supremacy in Buffalo, too. And before we delve into that, though, I mean, there are elements of joy that have to take place. And I know that's a tough term to think about, particularly in the sense that we're all mourning, we're reflecting. And even for me, it's hard to come off of, I got to drag myself out of the ivory tower just for a little bit and ponder the realities of the world that we exist in which politics drives the normality that challenges all of us, particularly when we're trying to push back against the elements of capitalism that drive things such as gun violence, drive things such as white supremacy and the criminality that tends to disrupt the preciousness of life in many ways. But, as we delve into that, Kat, I'm excited to have you on my show to talk about these things just for a little bit.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Hey, speaking a little bit about joy and stuff, one of the things I want to ask you about is the fact that you have been asked to be this year's Frederick Douglass Speaker. And, I got to tell you, as someone who's read quite a bit, a lot of, I've sat back and I've listened to that brother, or at least I've read his precious words in terms of how he pontificates on a lot of things, particularly facing the tragedies of the 19th century, as we know. What's going on in your mind as you think about, being a black woman stepping into the space of this presence of a black male, particularly who needs strong black women such as yourself to echo that voice?
I'm excited. I'm excited about the opportunity. I'm really grateful for the opportunity. And I think, it is, I don't know what the word that I'm looking for. It is painful that the words are still just as relevant.
Absolutely.
Right, today, but it's important that they continue to be heard.
I don't know if you know this or not. So I've done I've led the Douglass reading for the last, I think, 2-3 years. And I'm a little jealous of you because I'm an extrovert, as you know, and I had to do mine on Zoom. Oh. Whereas you're going to get a chance to greet and be in public places and everything, too. Do you remember your first memory of Douglass?
First memory. I don't. I know I didn't learn about any black leaders, so I know it wasn't.
Join the rest of the world.
It wasn't in K-12 school, right? I know that. I don't remember when I very first encountered Douglass. I don't. But I remember immediately falling in love with the power of the words.
Right, and that goes both ways too. For me, I don't remember the same. I remember just reading his stuff, talking about him, teaching. Really echoing his words and some of my own writing and my own scholarship as well. But, I'll tell you this. For me, it was probably maybe about 14 years ago, I decided that I'm no longer going to celebrate the 4th of July.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm not going to celebrate the 4th of July. Yeah, the 4th of July, as I've told folks, was really designed and invented to further the enslavement of black folks, right? And again, the American Revolutionary War was designed to continue to perpetuate notions of capitalism and to enslave black folks. And, when I became cognizant of that, I guess, I don't know, I was much younger then than I was now, I guess. But what I did was I would spend the 4th reading Douglass, right? Thinking about the celebrations of Juneteenth, and that's for another day, but that's a way we find black joy in everything, too. And so that's kind of how I think about that time. What's on your mind as you think about headed into the 4th of July and really bringing Douglass to life?
I'm I am, if I'm being honest and transparent,
Please,
I'm still
please.
mourning the 4th.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Yep.
So like, for me, it was maybe about 5 years ago that I realized that it was different. My dad is a vet, and I was raised just like any other American, right? The 4th of July was my favorite.
Everyone's firecrackers, you got barbecue, you got the
Yeah.
grill, you got a lot of people hanging out and really celebrating something that I'm not quite sure fully everyone absolutely comprehends nor grasps.
Absolutely, and I didn't. So Haverhill at the time would have the best fireworks in Carnival. People came from all over to come to our fireworks. And in fact, I think that was the problem. It got too big.
It got too
right?
big, yeah.
But I would fight if we were family reunion. I didn't want to be anywhere else but at the stadium on the 4th of July. And so I loved it. I grew up loving the 4th of July, and this painful, ongoing, sad realization that your America, being black in America is different.
Yes.
Right, and those experiences are different. And so reading the full national anthem, right? Like, there's chapters that, there's verses that they left out.
Right.
Like, coming to terms with some of that stuff. It's still, and this is something I think, oftentimes folks we've come to call white may not understand, right? That it's, because there's this white waking up, and there's all these terms that are flying around now, and there's like this pain and there's this mourning. But I think what sometimes folks we've come to call white might overlook is that we too experience a loss, right? There's and it's continual.
I mean, that's interesting. You mentioned that mourning process and the fact that you're still mourning this. And, we think about this dichotomy that exists here in the United States, the fact that most people are going to enter into a holiday, much like they celebrate MLK Day. Oh, it's just another day off work or out of school. It's just another day, without really thinking, and again, I'm making a generalization here about what that means. And this is not just about white folks, right? I mean, I'd say we can, it's probably about Asian folks, indigenous folks, but particularly, and I can talk about black folks as a black person, as a cis black man. I'm always marveled when I see black folks really celebrate the 4th. It's like for some folks, and I know them, it's their favorite holiday.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, they think about the grill and all this stuff, and they haven't really sat down to think about it. And I don't know if it's an educational thing. I don't know if it's an apathy thing. Or some people will probably tell me, Brother Carson, I think it's just a you thing. And you make a big deal out of too many stuff, and you overanalyze, you overly critique narratives of the past in ways in which we just need to move forward.
For me, and I can speak, first person, but for me, it was an educational thing. Mm-hmm. I only knew what I encountered. And I had a professor from Cameroon in college, and he used to always say, "You Americans are like a fish to water." And I didn't understand, what he meant. The class I took was veil politics. And it was all about the hidden meanings, the hidden messages.
Veil politics?
Veil politics.
Like VEIL?
Like veil.
Yeah, like the veil. Yeah, and of course that's interesting too, because when I hear the word veil, I naturally think about W.E.B. Du Bois, who talks about this veil that's cast upon us, and what does that mean here in the United States and everything too. He talks about the veil a great deal, especially in his opening chapter of Souls of Black Folks, Spiritual Strivings, that essay too. And so when you said that, because my mind always goes to Du Bois on a lot of things right there. That's just natural.
Yeah. I mean, it was, I guess, my beginning of waking up, questioning things.
Right.
Looking into things for myself, researching.
So you use the word mourning, and, let's go back to a couple weeks ago, and, when you heard about the situation in Buffalo, and that was, that was interesting. I got to say, I appreciate my head of school at the Governor's Academy, who sat down and drafted this, this beautiful letter that went out to all of my colleagues, students, alums, board members, families, really talking about how he was dealing with this and the emotional elements about understanding what happened in Buffalo. And, and for us as a campus, we came together one night, roughly around 9:00, great turnout. And we had a vigil, and we had folks who got up to the front of the in front of the chapel, and they just spoke, right?
Yeah.
And I was just moved. There were some students I hadn't seen before
Yeah.
who showed up for that and really denounced the problems of race and white supremacy, and really trying to grasp with the reality of the fact that a white man drove, I think, 2 hours and walked into a grocery store and killed black people because he's worried that black people, brown people, people of color are taking over the United States, in this United States of America, as we think about the 4th of July, will cease to be white. When you heard about that tragedy, what went through your mind?
It's conflicting, right? Because of the work that I do in the space of trying to build spaces of inclusion. So many of my clients reached out and said, they wanted to put together a statement and wanted to process, what was being, what to say, basically. And there are so many hate crimes.
Yes.
Right? And it's important that you say something, but it's also important that you're consistent. Right? So I was conflicted because, yes, I wanted everyone to say something, right? But I want them to acknowledge the systemic problem with white supremacy, right? And how that connects to all of the things. So, in Haverhill, we had an interfaith vigil on Thursday night. And this was after the shooting in Texas as well. And it was just, there was also, I forget where it was, but there was an attack and it's the AAPI community that same week. I think it was maybe the day before. And so I was encouraging my clients, right, to make a statement, but to make sure that they're talking about the problem and not just the incident, if that makes sense.
No, it does. So when I think about the problem, and again, I'm a black man in America, so that means I'm political. If we're all honest, we're all political, and we have to be that way too. I sit back and I think about, I don't know, in the last election, and I'm sure someone will correct me, Donald Trump got, 71 million votes, someone who advocates white supremacy, right? I sit there and I look at other folks who talk about the problems of this country and the browning of this country. Let's make America great again. That's buzzword. That's code word for let's make America white again. Let's go back to traditional values and all of that stuff. And all of a sudden, America will be safe. But yet, when I think about let's make America great again, I think back to Jim Crow. I think back to the lynching of black folks. I think back to all the ills and injustices that we want to talk about pre-1965, but yet we forget those realities still exist here in the 21st century.
Yes.
That's what I think about, even when I sit there and I think about the crimes and the farce that continues to happen.
No, I agree. I have no rebuttal.
No rebuttal.
No rebuttal.
No. So I'm preaching to the choir here.
No, I agree. Yeah. Full-fledged.
What was your first memory? And this, again, I always like these questions because they're not fair questions. So I ask folks
great.
this. Yeah, when you first experience some level of, or not even yourself personally, but when you first experience levels of violence, whether it's at the hands of a white supremacist, reading about it in a paper, or hearing about the realities and the tragedy that happened in Uvalde, Texas, for example, and then you sit back and you start to question the world we live in and the realities of the folks who continue to make this happen. Outside my office, I have this sign, and it has thoughts, prayers, and both of them are marked out. And it says, just take action, just do something. But when tragedy happened, we have thoughts, we have prayers, and yet no one wants to do anything. And so to get back to my question, do you have a particular memory that comes to your mind when you think about tragedy?
So the first thing that comes to my mind, if I'm being honest, is 9/11.
Yes.
And I think that's because I had a infant son. I was 19. And so as I was coming into my own sense of, adulthood, sense of self, there's this tragedy that happens, and it's never been the same since, right? Like, the flag is always at half mast. Like, there's always a tragedy. There's always something that's happening. And I'm sure it happened before.
Right.
But that was my awakening.
Yeah.
Right.
You just seen something horrific. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I'm talking about mass scale things. I remember growing up and, just, showing up at school, for example, when I went to Capitol Heights and hearing about, another shooting or this brother getting shot or gunned down or some type of violence like that. So those things continue to happen, and they happen all the time. Oftentimes, as we know, unreported, right?
Yes.
Because it
Yeah.
takes mass shootings and stuff. For me, I'm going to say it was probably mid 90s, and it was the Oklahoma City bombing. Timothy, you know what? We don't mention folks' names
Yeah.
who do horrific stuff, so I'm not going to mention. I'm not going to mention his name. That was the first. And so, as you think about 9/11, you think about these incidents. How do you deal with those things? Is there something that you do in terms of maybe meditating, something that brings you joy or bring you peace? And peace may be a better word than joy here.
I struggle with joy. We talked about that a little bit last time, but peace, I think, is the one I would gravitate towards.
Yeah.
And it would be my given faith. My personal belief in a purpose, right? And I have lots of kids, so in regards to like the school shootings, I'm always thinking about that. It's always difficult to send the kids to school the next day or the next week. The only thing that really gives me solace is in who my kids are, because I believe so much damage happens in elementary school. Just so much damage.
So I mean, say a little bit more about that, because I know you know this particularly in terms of your own community organizing and activist work and the things that you've done within school communities. Say a little bit about that.
So I mean, obviously, there's no. I don't believe there's any quick fixes, right? My daughter, the night before the Texas shooting, had a dream of the Alice training that they do in the schools.
Oh, yep. I've gone through the Alice training.
So she
Absolutely.
was. It's traumatizing to children, right? So
Yeah.
she had a dream, and in the dream, her father got shot, and that's her sense of safety, right? And so that bothered me. And then the next day there was a shooting, so that bothered me as well. But like I said, the only thing that gives me comfort is and who the kids are, because I feel like so often, and this is not really talked about a whole lot, the way that kids treat kids, right? We know about ACEs and childhood trauma and how much that impacts people, but when this conversation comes up, there's not a whole lot of attention that I've seen anyway that goes into teaching your kids to be kind, teaching your kids, to be that one that goes up and talks to someone. And my kids, we hold them accountable. There's a high standard towards kindness, and that gives me comfort, right? That gives me comfort in them kind of going to school, not to say that it's going to stop anything, but in regards to and minimizing harm.
Right.
Right.
No, so folks, if you're chiming in, this is you're listening to Race Matters. This is WJOPLP Newburyport Joppa Radio 96.3. We're talking about finding joy, or maybe a better word is peace, amidst tragedy in terms of what's taking place here too. So what do you do? I'm not a father.
Yeah.
I don't have kids, and and so I'm going to ask this question to you in two parts, right? So the first part here is, after the tragedy of a school shooting, what goes through your mind when you think about your own children, for example? That's the first part of the question. The second part of the question, and this is something that I think about a great deal, is my presence in white spaces, right? And of course, the situation in Buffalo wasn't in a white space; it was in a black community. And yet, when I go into restaurants, I have rules. Some of my rules, for example, my back is never to a room. I have to see everyone who's in a room. I have to see everyone who walks into the door, right? I even have rules about whether or not I will ever call a cop. And the reality for me is, I don't. I just figure it out for myself, right? I have lots of rules being a black man here. So I need to see those things. So first, tell us about your thinking about your own children as a mother, and then as a black person, especially in terms of what we've experienced and seen in Buffalo.
I feel like it's sad that those are two different things, but they are two different things for me, right? And so, for example, I am constantly worried about my son, worried about my husband, worried about, them being black men in America and the fear of violence every single day, right? And I also know that that's not something that everyone understands or can comprehend. But when there is a tragedy with children, whether you have a child or not, everyone is empathetic.
Yes.
Right. So those
Yeah,
are
that's a
the
great point.
kind of teaching
Yes.
moments, right, where everyone is like, that could be any of our kids, as opposed to the daily harm, right, that my black sons face and the threat of violence every single day, which is not necessarily the same for everybody. So I do think that those are two different pockets, but this is, I don't know how else to say this, but as a black woman, we are so accustomed to carrying that trauma, right? That it's you go into the same routine of the mode of protecting, right? And coping. You know, my mother taught me I don't sing well.
That's okay. I don't sing at all.
I should say that, right? But she sings, and she taught me to just sing. And so you sing, you know, hymns or, you know, whatever song is comforting. I have a poem, actually, because I do spit fire. I do spoken word, about singing, you know, about a paradox of lies until they become true. Songs like I Feel Like Going On, right? When you don't, and you just keep singing it until it's true, until you're, you know, just past that moment. But also I use them as teaching opportunities when I'm in spaces and places to be able to do that within my sphere of influence, to shine a light towards the fact that, you know, kind of getting at the problem and not just the incident, but both are important.
And how about the fact that you are a black woman, you identify as a black woman, black family, and oftentimes you find yourself in white spaces and thinking about maybe the threat because of your race. How does that enter your mind? And again, you know, I've had a number of conversations with a number of women, regardless of race, and I tell them about how I look at spaces, and they tell me, Eddie, you're talking to a woman.
Yeah.
I think about this all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, there as a female, there's the consistent threat of violence, right? And as someone who has been harmed in public spaces, right? I don't like, for example, run. I used to run. I loved running. I used to do track, and I would love to, you know, just kind of run on the road. Running on the road is different, you know, than running on a treadmill. But I don't. I haven't run in years.
Is it because of the idea of being in open spaces and running? And again, you know, I think for a lot of folks, we think about Ahmaud Arbery,
Yes.
right? And,
Yeah.
and the tragedy that happened to him in Atlanta, for example, just being black and running in the wrong neighborhood.
Yeah, it's fear of being harmed, period. There's no other way around that.
So as you think about this, right, and you think about ways you enter, you think about these spaces, one of the things I'll say is I was moved by the response from all Americans, particularly white folks, about what happened down in Uvalde, Texas, because that happened in a brown community, brown kids, brown folks, right? That this happened, and you know, I got a glimpse of what it looked like for us to erase the color line and find commonality and grieving and being angry at a situation that happened. Did that thought ever come to your mind when you looked at what happened and the attention that got? And this is true for Buffalo too, right? So white folks interracially, you know, come to the, you know, kind of serve as this vanguard in a way to disavow hate crimes.
I do see an uptick, right? I do see an uptick. I just, again, I would like that to be more consistent.
Oh.
I would like for the same response to happen for the API community, right? Like I would just like it to be consistent, that folks continue to show up, and you know, that's the way that the needle gets moved, I feel like, and not just when it's trending, right, or the ones that get more attention. So it's challenging.
You know, the reality, of course, though, is nothing gets attention until there's a tragedy that happens. And then what happens, right? And again, I'm guilty of this too. You know, we grieve, we mourn, we're angry, we're frustrated, we're wrestling with these challenges that exist. and then we move on. We move forward. And then the next tragedy happens, and then we're reminded. I mean, I could be wrong on this date, but I want to say Columbine happened in like 1999. Then there was Jonesboro in Arkansas, right? These big mass shootings that we know about. Of course, people are outraged or getting upset, and then nothing happens, and we move forward from there and just kind of sit back in silence.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I try to use it as a teachable moment, right? Because as somebody who does go into the schools,
Yes.
it's one of the hardest things to do is get folks to come to schools.
So say a little bit more about that. So as someone who goes into the schools and getting folks to do that, tell me a little bit. And then if you could, and not to interrupt you here, I know you and your husband, Dennis, y'all did a great promo and a video with music at, I think it was in North Andover.
Oh, yeah.
At the high school on behalf of Pose. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Pose does work with schools. Typically, there's an incident, right?
So, okay, so now we're reacting.
Typically, there's an incident.
So we're reacting,
but,
all right?
But there's an opportunity, right? We use it as an opportunity to go in and to have these conversations about social justice. And we ask the youth, because they know best, what are the things going on in their schools, right? And what are the solutions that they either find within their schools or that they make themselves, right? Or what could some solutions be? And we've done, I think 3 or 4 music videos now, but that's always the same theme, right? The theme is what are the issues going on? How can we draw attention to this? What are some solutions? And the youth storyboard it so that they're telling their narratives, right? Which is always really powerful. So that's the type of thing that we do, right? But just in general, because one of our strategic focuses within the nonprofit is, positive youth development, always trying to get folks to come in, mentoring, or, you can't call out a problem without offering the solution, right? And
I'm pretty good at calling out problems, and I don't always have solutions.
You're right. You gotta have this, or at least bring folks together to try to find the solutions, right? And it's hard. It's hard to get mentors into the schools, right? It's hard to get folks to show up beyond the care of their own kid, right? And so again, when there's these moments of tragedy, you remind folks, it's not good to just talk. It's the action part of it has to come with caring beyond your own kid.
Do you think it's because people are just too busy? They don't care. There's just grand apathy that's there. I mean, you talk about it's hard to bring folks into the fold here. Why do you think that's the case? I'm sure you have some idea.
I think we do get caught up, but I think those are excuses. If you think, okay, if you could spare an hour of your time, an hour a week, an hour a month, right? It would make an impact. And I'm going to say this because it's just absolutely true. There's a need for representation, right, in schools, but there's also a need for male presence. Most of the teachers are white female women.
Interesting.
And it's like, they're just, there is a difference. There is a difference. I remember, because it's like, just like with any kind of diversity, when you have something that's different, you remember that. I remember the few male teachers that I had, and they made an impact on me.
Do you think, though, that type of representation, that type of presence brings about the type of societal changes we need in the classroom? And again, I know that sounds like a silly question to ask. Some people push back and say, it's not a big deal. Representation is not going to matter when we think about the situation in Uvalde. We think about the crisis in Buffalo or the presence of people. Race shouldn't even matter. We're just talking about human beings. That whole colorblind ideology perspective that's there.
Of course it matters.
I know it does.
Because, listen, we're just coming out of May, which was, also Mental Health Awareness Month. And I think that that's a conversation that also, trends, like it upticks whenever there's a mass shooting. Like the topic comes up and then it dies down. But it does. It absolutely makes a difference.
After our vigil on campus, there was this one sister, this one black sister who walked out. And one of the things I recall her saying, it was her and a group of students who gathered, and she was angry and frustrated, particularly about the Buffalo situation. So I'm going to stay there for a second, because we seem to always want to blame everything on mental health. And she said, I can't repeat what she said, not on the air, but let's just say she said something to the likes of bleep, 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 bleep. and went on to say, we always blame this on on mental health, when the reality is it's just hate, greed, bigotry, and white supremacy. How would you respond to that?
Isn't that a sickness? And I'm not excusing it.
I mean, and it's interesting. So you would say racism, white supremacy, all of that stuff is a disease. It's a sickness. It's an illness.
I wouldn't go as far as to say it's a disease, right? But I do think that there is something shifted, right, in somebody's psyche to believe, to hate, right? Like not everything is in order, maybe, right? Like I think that's that shouldn't be that, okay, well, this is what's normal. Like that's abnormal.
I mean, well, and folks, if you're just chiming in here, again, this is WJOPLP Newburyport. I'm Eddie Carson, and you're listening to Race Matters here at Joppa Radio 96.3. I don't know if I've ever told you this. Maybe I have, because I've told a lot of people this. I'm not an optimistic person. Have I ever told you that before?
No, you've never said that.
I am not an optimistic person at all. And oftentimes, I sit there and I think about the level and extent of hate that's predicated on white supremacy, it not being a mental health thing, not being a sickness, whatever. I think it's just downright evil. And I suspect you, as a Christian sister,
absolutely,
probably disavow such an argument that's driven by this notion of just pure evil.
I believe in pure evil, right? But again, I think that's it's complicated, right? It's complicated because when I think of just pure evil, I think of the demonic, right? And so that's a spiritual conversation,
right?
And the spiritual conversations and conversations about mental wellness, they're connected.
Ooh, okay. You're gonna have to educate me a little bit more. Say a little bit more about that.
I mean, it's there's an aspect, I think, for certain conditions where there is an aspect of spirituality and mental health that are working together, essentially, right? Schizophrenia, for example, comes to mind, right? Where there's oftentimes this either whether it's an obsession, right, in regards to religion or spiritual components, but those two tend to be very well connected, and I do think there's an aspect of spiritual activity, right, and also mental wellness or mental health that are working kind of together. To the best example I've seen in regards to that is almost like to mask the person. Yeah. So
it's not going to surprise you when I say it's a little hokey, and I'm just going to stick with. I
know you don't like the supernatural stuff. I know that.
No. I don't believe in the boogeyman. I don't believe in ghosts and all that. I do believe that evil does exist, sure, right? And then some people say it has to come from somewhere, and I just say, you know what, it comes from the fact that people have been raised and conditioned to hate others because that conditioning is predicated on their own sense of self, what they value over other folks, right? Whiteness over blackness, right? Whiteness over Asianness, brownness over indigenousness, straight over queerness, for example, male over female, and we think about male supremacy. And a lot of that stuff is just driven by ambition for the fact that people desire power, and that evil comes or is predicated out of those notions, right? And we see this in a lot of ways too. I mean, I'm not going to go on a sermon here, but I mean, we could talk about this, whether we talk about the planet and climate, right? People don't love the world enough. They just love themselves enough to not care because that's, someone's problem in 50, 60, 70 years, and they're thinking, I won't be here. I'll let them deal with that. Or this is that or this or whatever may be the case. One man's opinion.
But there's also differing levels of consciousness, right? So just like the fish to water, like the pre-me with 4th of July, right? I think that there are certain folks that are raised in it that don't question or understand.
No, and that's fair,
And again, I'm not excusing.
No, I understand.
I just think it's important to know the path.
And I've heard of stories of people who change, right? people who are no longer this way. There's remorse, there's regret, all of those things. I struggle with that in some ways too. It's hard for me. I can't empathize with certain levels of behavior, right? When people were just, I'm not even talking about mean. I'm talking about something very, very different. But all of this stuff, right, just kind of gets you thinking, wow, Brother Carson, you're just wearing me out. I'm feeling sad and kind of depressed tonight and all this stuff, and that's not what we're looking to do. And so living in a world where all of those conditions do exist, you mentioned your faith. What else do you do to try to find a sense of joy, in particular, even peace, in a world of adversity, a world in which, to use the religious language here, where sin is ubiquitous, where folks seek their own sense of self over other folks, even if it means, I don't know, exploiting them, right?
For me, you look for areas where you are able to influence, right? And kind of beyond that, I've been, particularly over the last year, maybe even less time than that, I've been much more intent on being content with the polarities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But some people, do you worry that some people would push back on the term content?
Maybe content is not the right word. But there is a selfish aspect, right? There is an aspect of self-preservation, right? Because if you are any kind of advocate or activist, it comes at a cost, right? So there's that aspect of if I am not okay, if I am not around, I can't do the work.
Right.
Right. So the term that I love to use, that I try to be, is a reflective practitioner, right? Where there are those times where I'm pouring in to me. There are times that I'm, giving myself permission to stop, to slow down, to rest. They're few and far between, but that's how I manage that.
So, if we think about even the term peace, for example, too, there's got to be a level of peace that's connected to being optimistic, right? And again, I'm not an optimistic person. And then when I see what happened in Texas, what happened in upstate New York, for example, I'm not optimistic whatsoever. Is that bad?
I don't know that I would necessarily associate it with optimism either, because as a Christian, it doesn't. Our understanding of peace so often is not necessarily associated with things getting better, but the ability to withstand.
But that's exhausting and that's tiring. It's tiring. Excuse me.
Both.
I think about the struggles of oppressed and marginalized folks, right? They've been in this fight for so long, and then they hang in there, but you just get tired.
Again, no, that's the whole thing with Christianity and the supernatural, the part you don't like, right, is beyond yourself, resting in the power of the Holy Spirit, right?
Right.
I don't in and of myself have this capacity.
Yes.
Right. And so the higher, the greater than self, right? The what's that, the word? There's like a term. The higher power, right? Like there's something bigger than yourself that you can tap into, that you can rely on.
So what would your advice be to me? So right here, I'm not an optimistic person. Everything I do, right, as a historian, right, the things that I write, the talks that I give, things that I teach. I don't love history. I'm not a history buff, and I tell folks this all the time. I'm a monster reader, and I delve in this stuff to help me fight the injustices and the sins and all the problems that exist in the world, not because I love this stuff, but it's like, I want to use the correct word here. It drives me, I guess. I'm just going to go with that, right? It drives me to suffocate inequality. And I believe that if I don't show up, right, if I don't campaign and work against the evils, against white supremacy, against the problems that capitalism create by the fact that no one wants to touch, gun regulations or all these things that promote these problems here. in my mind, if I don't do it, no one's going to do it.
But you also teach.
That's true.
Right. So I view that it's not like it will end with you. Right. You're raising folks. You're stirring passion. Right. You're stoking embers.
Oh, and I do a lot of stoking according to folks.
Yes. Yeah. So I think, and I don't know if you already do, but if I were to give you advice,
I'm open to advice.
To find joy in that. It's got to bring you some type of joy when you see a youth come back.
No, it does. It brings
you've
me
set them ablaze.
Oh,
right?
absolutely. No, and that's the whole idea. It brings me joy in a sense, but for me, as I like to tell folks, and I've been criticized for this, and I've been criticized for lots of things. That's okay. Keep the criticism going. I'm 24/7, and the criticism that I get is, Brother Carson, you got to dial it back. You got to turn it off, right? You're going to wear yourself out. You're going to drive yourself into the grave. This is not healthy. This is not good for you. You're constantly, starting a fire and trying to put out another fire. You're campaigning against this and campaigning against that, and you're constantly on a go, 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 go. Everything out of your mouth, every conversation, all the books you read, all of that stuff. You're just moving. And I'll be the first to admit this. Even on vacation, it's hard for me to take a break. It is hard to take a break, and we know these things aren't helpful or helpful nor healthy. And that's the struggle.
It's challenging because if that's what brings you joy, then it's like it's a double narrative, It's what drives you, but if you're doing that on your off time, whatever downtime you're supposed to have, then that's also probably what brings you joy.
Well, I'll say that. And I have a confession, though. I've been watching this hilarious show on Amazon Prime, and as an anti-capitalist, here I am giving Jeff Bezos and Amazon money to watch their shows and order their products, right? And I can't remember the last time Amazon paid anything in federal income taxes or anything like that. So
I'm definitely guilty of that.
Oh, I'm a horrible, horrible person living and existing in this world of capitalism. That's there too, though. But and we will say there are some things that I look forward to and that bring me a smile. I have this, family brings a smile, right? My dog Baxter, who is family. I have 2 cats now. They bring me they bring me a smile that's here. Everyone knows this brother likes to sit back and enjoy a nice Dominican and Nicaraguan cigar more than from time to time. Those things do bring me joy.
Yeah.
Having conversations with students, to your point, when they are outraged about, what happened to that brown community in Texas, what happened to that black community up in New York, seeing folks who turn out for that stuff and folks who don't have to turn out for those things. Those things bring me joy. I pay attention. And to the point you mentioned, right, the challenge is whether or not folks will show up.
Yeah.
That's always the issue. So as we get to the end here, I got a question for you, okay? If I had a quarter left,
okay,
right, and so folks who may be listening to this and they don't know what a payphone is, that's something that you actually have to stick a quarter, and at one point I think I got up to 50 cents to make a phone call in order to dial.
Yep.
But I like this reference.
3/4.
Or 3/4, 75 cents. So it got up there,
vividly.
right? But we're gonna stick with the 1/4 reference,
Okay,
right? Because I don't have a quarter on me, or more than a quarter. If I have 1/4 left, and I put that quarter into a payphone, and I say, "Cat, I'm in trouble because I decided to show up for injustice against a community of folks, and I can't do this by myself." Do you answer that call?
Of course.
Always?
Always.
I love it. Let me ask you this. Do you believe that you have a large population of folks that you can call and depend on for doing that? Or is that number, that population small for you?
That's small.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's small. But I think that how do I word that? Even though who I might have available to do that for me is small, right? If you were to call me, the network that I could tap into to be able to pull together the bail money, right, is larger, and so that's good.
Well, I'm gonna say this, and I tell it to my mother too, and to other folks. Yeah, I'm never gonna be arrested, and I'm not gonna go to jail for doing something that's wrong, right? I will though, and will not even hesitate to get in trouble for showing up for injustice.
Sure.
Right. And I think that's what we're facing right now. Yeah, the idea that people care about their own pocketbooks, their money, right? And again, there's nothing optimistic about this whatsoever. You know, people continue to use their vote by supporting people who have no real interest in making a change, right? That's not going to happen. And even some of the small things people can do to be revolutionary in making those changes, I think people say they'll do those things, much like I think folks will say they'll show up, but in actuality, I don't think they will. I don't think most people will show up. I have a small handful of folks that I am confident, right? I'm sitting down there. I'm in the trenches. I'm fighting battles and struggling against all the sins and the problems in the world. And the reality from me is that I don't think I can depend on a lot of folks, very, very, very few folks who actually show up and do something to bring that change. And I'm talking about something as small as voting for the good of society and not yourself. Even that's showing up. And folks won't do that.
I'm trying to think of something optimistic that I can say to battle that.
Because I'm right.
Yes, you're right, but I think it's important to know who those few are.
I agree. And I feel
at least you don't want to waste that quarter.
Or, I can't remember the last time I used a payphone. I don't know. It's been a while. Do you, as we come to the end here of Race Matters here at WJOP LP Newburyport, Joppa Radio 96.3, is there anything you would like to share with us about the great work or anything coming up on behalf of polls that's happening?
Actually, yes. If I can pull this up, there is a Juneteenth cookout that's coming up in Lowell, and it is...
and actually, I know about that. I was kind of throwing you an alley-oop little basketball thing.
Thank you. I almost forgot to mention that. So this is being put on by the Afro-American Community Collaborative, which is several organizations, including POSE. It is the Juneteenth and Father's Day Community Block Party. It is going to be in Lowell at the, I guess it's called the Green Space at UTEC, 35 Warren Street in Lowell, on June 19th from 5 to 10 p.m. And they're inviting out the communities of Lowell, Haver, Lawrence, and North Andover.
That's great. And so June 19th, folks, and I'm assuming everyone knows that's Juneteenth.
Yes.
That date. I think this year, though, if I'm right, that falls on Father's Day.
It does, Sunday.
Which is a Sunday.
Yeah.
So a lot of great things that can happen right there, too.
Yes.
Right? Celebrate fathers and dads and all of that kind of jazz.
Don't buy any ice cream from Walmart,
You don't? Oh, I heard about that. I heard about that. I had to think about it for a second, right? Oh, Walmart exploiting Juneteenth.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, imagine that, right? What's new there?
Shocker.
Oh, I know, I'm stunned. Folks, thank you for chiming in and listening, and I'm super excited here to have Kat Everett in the house and to be our guest and everything. Hope you'll chime in next time. We're going to talk a little bit more about the Juneteenth, particularly the Juneteenth festival that we're going to be holding at City Hall here in Newburyport. And I suspect the turnout will be great there. So thank you again. Be well, folks.